The morning sun cast long shadows across Highway 87 as Officer Jake Martinez adjusted his rearview mirror and settled into his patrol car. It was going to be another quiet Tuesday in the small town of Cedar Ridge, population 8,000. Jake had been working this beat for 5 years, and he knew every pothole, every speed trap, and every regular commuter who traveled this stretch of road. At 9:30 a.m., Jake noticed a black motorcycle approaching in his side mirror. The bike was moving fast, maybe 10 miles over the speed limit. Nothing too serious, but enough to warrant a routine traffic stop. As the motorcycle passed his position, Jake caught a glimpse of the rider, a man wearing a leather jacket, jeans, and a helmet that covered his face completely. Jake flipped on his lights and pulled out onto the highway. The motorcycle rider noticed the flashing red and blue lights immediately and began to slow down, pulling over to the shoulder of the road near mile marker 23. Everything seemed normal. The rider cooperated, turning off his engine and placing his hands where they could be seen. Officer Martinez parked his patrol car about 20 feet behind the motorcycle and stepped out. The desert air was already getting warm and he could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance. He approached the rider slowly, following standard procedure. "Good morning, sir," Jake called out as he walked toward the bike. "I pulled you over because you were going 65 in a 55 zone. Can I see your license and registration, please?" The rider reached slowly toward his jacket pocket. He pulled out a wallet and handed over his driver's license without saying a word. Jake noticed that the man's hands were steady and he seemed calm. There was something different about this guy, though. Most people were nervous during traffic stops, fidgeting or talking too much. This rider was completely composed. Jake looked at the license. The name read Michael Thompson, with an address in Cedar Ridge. The photo showed a man in his early 30s with short brown hair and serious eyes. Everything looked legitimate. "Mr. Thompson, this is a nice bike you have here," Jake said, trying to make conversation while he examined the license. "What kind of work do you do?" The rider remained silent for a moment, then spoke in a quiet, measured voice. "I work for the government." That was it. No elaboration, no details. Just, "I work for the government." Jake had heard that answer before from people who worked at the nearby military base, Fort Harrison, which was about 50 miles east of Cedar Ridge. Many soldiers and civilian contractors lived in town and commuted to the base daily. "Fort Harrison?" Jake asked. "Something like that," the rider replied. Jake walked back to his patrol car to run the license through the system. He called in the license number to dispatch and waited for the results. Dispatch operator Sarah Kim's voice crackled through the radio. "Unit 23, I'm running that license now. Give me a minute." Jake watched the motorcycle rider in his rear-view mirror. The man hadn't moved an inch. He sat perfectly still on his bike, hands resting on his knees, looking straight ahead. Most people would be checking their phone or looking around, but this guy was like a statue. After 3 minutes, Sarah's voice came back on the radio, but this time she sounded different. Her usually casual tone had changed to something more serious. "Unit 23, I'm getting some unusual results on this license. I need to transfer you to my supervisor." Jake frowned. In 5 years of police work, he had never heard Sarah say anything like that. Unusual results? What did that mean? He waited for Sergeant Williams to come on the radio. "Officer Martinez, this is Sergeant Williams. I need you to step away from the suspect immediately and wait for backup." "Backup? Sarge, this is just a routine speeding ticket. The guy was going 10 over. Martinez, listen carefully. Do not approach the suspect again. Do not attempt to arrest him. Just maintain visual contact and wait for instructions. Backup is en route." Jake's heart started beating faster. He looked at the motorcycle rider again. The man still hadn't moved. It was almost unnatural how still he was sitting. "Sergeant, what's going on? What did you find when you ran his license?" There was a pause on the radio. Then Sergeant Williams came back with an answer that made Jake's blood run cold. "Officer Martinez, according to the federal database, The man you pulled over doesn't exist. Jake stared at his radio, trying to process what he had just heard. What do you mean he doesn't exist? The license is real, but when we run it through the federal system, it comes back with a classified flag. I've never seen anything like this. I'm getting calls from people I've never heard of telling me to keep you away from this guy until they get there. Jake looked at his rearview mirror again. The motorcycle rider had finally moved. He had turned his head slightly and was looking directly at Jake's patrol car. Even though Jake couldn't see the man's eyes through the helmet visor, he felt like he was being studied. "Who's coming, Sarge?" "I don't know exactly. Some kind of federal agents, maybe military police. They said they'd be there in 15 minutes. 15 minutes felt like an eternity. Jake kept his eyes on the motorcycle rider while trying to figure out what was happening. Who was this Michael Thompson? Why would a simple speeding ticket trigger a federal response? The man on the motorcycle finally stood up from his bike. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward his service weapon, but the rider just stretched his legs and looked around at the desert landscape. He didn't seem concerned about anything. If Jake didn't know better, he would think the guy was just enjoying the morning scenery. At exactly 9:47 a.m., Jake heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching from the east. At first, it sounded like regular traffic, but as the sound got closer, Jake realized it was something much different. The rumble was deep and powerful, like heavy trucks or military vehicles. Jake looked down the highway and saw something that made him question everything he thought he knew about his quiet little town. A convoy of military Humvees was approaching at high speed, their engines roaring as they covered the distance between Fort Harrison and mile marker 23. There were at least 8 vehicles in the convoy, possibly more. They were moving in perfect formation, and Jake could see soldiers in combat gear manning the mounted weapons on top of each Humvee. This wasn't a routine patrol or a training exercise. This was a full military response to his traffic stop. The motorcycle rider noticed the approaching convoy and finally removed his helmet. Jake got his first clear look at the man's face. Michael Thompson was probably in his mid-30s with dark hair cut in a military style. His face was lean and weathered, with the kind of tan that comes from spending time in desert environments. But it was his eyes that caught Jake's attention. They were alert and calculating, constantly scanning the environment like someone who had been trained to expect danger from any direction. The convoy reached mile marker 23 and began to slow down. The lead Humvee pulled up behind Jake's patrol car, and the other vehicles spread out in a defensive formation around the area. Soldiers immediately jumped out and took positions, their weapons ready but not pointed at anyone specific. A tall man in military fatigues stepped out of the lead Humvee. He wore captain's bars on his uniform and moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. Jake had never seen so much firepower assembled for a traffic stop. The captain approached Jake's patrol car and knocked on the driver's side window. Jake rolled it down, still trying to process what was happening. "Officer Martinez, I'm Captain Rodriguez from Fort Harrison. I need you to step out of your vehicle and brief me on the situation." Jake got out of his patrol car, feeling completely out of his depth. "Captain, I honestly don't know what the situation is. I pulled this guy over for speeding and now half the army is here. What's going on?" Captain Rodriguez looked toward the motorcycle rider, who was now standing beside his bike with his arms crossed. The captain's expression was serious, but not angry. "Officer Martinez, you've just pulled over one of the most classified individuals in the United States military." Jake stared at Captain Rodriguez, trying to understand what most classified individual meant. Around them, 50 soldiers had created a security perimeter that stretched across both sides of the highway. Traffic was being redirected by military personnel who had appeared from nowhere. "Captain, I need to understand what's happening here," Jake said. "That man's license says he's Michael Thompson from Cedar Ridge. He was speeding. That's all I know." Captain Rodriguez glanced toward the motorcycle rider, who was now walking slowly toward them. The man moved with a fluid, confident gait that Jake recognized from his military friends. This was definitely someone with extensive training. Officer Martinez, the man you know as Michael Thompson, is actually Colonel James Mitchell. He's returning from a classified mission that officially never happened. His cover identity is so deep that even local law enforcement databases don't have access to his real information. Jake felt his world shifting. A colonel? The quiet guy on the motorcycle was a high-ranking military officer? What kind of mission? The kind I can't discuss on an open highway, Captain Rodriguez replied. What I can tell you is that Colonel Mitchell has been operating undercover for the past 6 months. Your traffic stop just compromised an operation that took 2 years to set up. The motorcycle rider, Colonel Mitchell, finally reached them. Up close, Jake could see the man's face more clearly. There were small scars around his eyes and a thin line across his chin that suggested he had seen combat. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes never stopped moving, constantly assessing his surroundings. "Captain Rodriguez," Colonel Mitchell said, his voice calm and professional. "I assume my cover has been blown?" "Completely, sir. When Officer Martinez ran your license, it triggered alerts all the way to the Pentagon. We had to mobilize immediately to contain the situation." Jake looked between the two military men, feeling like he was in the middle of a movie. "Contain the situation? What does that mean?" Colonel Mitchell turned to Jake and extended his hand. "Officer Martinez, I apologize for the confusion. None of this is your fault. You were doing your job." Jake shook the colonel's hand, noticing the firm grip and calloused palms. "Sir, I'm completely lost here. What kind of mission requires a fake identity in Cedar Ridge?" Captain Rodriguez and Colonel Mitchell exchanged glances. The captain nodded slightly, and the colonel seemed to make a decision. "Officer Martinez, for the past 6 months, I've been living in Cedar Ridge while investigating a weapons smuggling operation. We had intelligence that suggested someone in your town was selling military-grade equipment to terrorist organizations." Jake's jaw dropped. Weapons smuggling? "In Cedar Ridge? Sir, the most exciting thing that happens here is the annual Corn Festival." "That's exactly what made it perfect," Colonel Mitchell explained. "Small town, everyone knows everyone, no one suspects anything unusual. The smugglers were using a local business as a front. I was getting close to identifying the entire network." "How close?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Very close. I was supposed to make contact with their leader tomorrow night. The plan was to gather enough evidence to roll up the entire operation." Colonel Mitchell looked frustrated. "Now that plan is finished." Jake realized the magnitude of what had happened. His routine traffic stop had destroyed months of undercover work. "Colonel, I had no idea. If I had known—" "There was no way you could have known," Colonel Mitchell said. "The cover identity was designed to be perfect for local law enforcement. The problem is that when you ran my license through the federal database, it triggered security protocols that we can't undo." Captain Rodriguez was listening to something on his radio earpiece. His expression grew more serious. "Colonel, we have a problem. Our communications intercept team is reporting increased activity on known smuggler frequencies. They're aware that something is happening." "How much do they know?" Colonel Mitchell asked. "Unknown, but they're moving faster than expected. Our surveillance teams report vehicles leaving the suspected locations. It looks like they're evacuating." Jake watched the conversation and realized that his small town was apparently the center of an international investigation. "Captain, who exactly are these smugglers? What kind of weapons are we talking about?" Captain Rodriguez looked at Colonel Mitchell, who nodded again. "Officer Martinez, we're talking about high-tech military equipment, night vision systems, encrypted communications gear, body armor designed for special forces, equipment that could give terrorist organizations a significant advantage. And it's all coming through Cedar Ridge?" "Not just through Cedar Ridge," Colonel Mitchell said. "It's being coordinated from Cedar Ridge. Someone in your town is running a sophisticated operation that reaches across multiple countries." Jake tried to process this information. He had grown up in Cedar Ridge, knew most of the business owners personally. The idea that one of them was selling weapons to terrorists seemed impossible. "Who do you suspect?" Jake asked. Colonel Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "I can't give you specific names yet, but I can tell you it's someone with the resources to move large amounts of equipment and the connections to reach international buyers." Captain Rodriguez received another radio transmission. "Colonel, the situation is escalating. Headquarters wants you extracted immediately. The mission is being declared compromised." "No," Colonel Mitchell said firmly. 6 months of work can't just disappear because of one traffic stop. There has to be another way." Jake looked at the military convoy surrounding them and had an idea. "What if the traffic stop becomes part of your cover?" Both military men turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Everyone in town knows I pulled someone over this morning. By tonight, everyone will know that a huge military convoy showed up. Instead of hiding it, what if we use it?" Colonel Mitchell's eyes showed interest. "Keep talking." "What if Michael Thompson isn't just a regular citizen? What if he's a military contractor or someone with security clearance who got pulled over and caused a big reaction because of sensitive cargo on his bike?" Captain Rodriguez was nodding slowly. "That could work. It explains the military response without revealing the undercover operation." "But what about the smugglers?" Colonel Mitchell asked. "They'll be suspicious of any military activity." Jake smiled. "Not if Michael Thompson is their new customer." The colonel and captain stared at Jake. "Explain," Captain Rodriguez said. "What if the traffic stop and military response makes the smugglers think that Michael Thompson is exactly the kind of person they want to do business with? Someone important enough to trigger a federal response? Someone with money and connections?" Colonel Mitchell was quiet for several seconds, thinking through the implications. "It's risky. If they investigate too deeply—" "But if it works," Captain Rodriguez said, "it could actually accelerate the timeline. Instead of you approaching them, they might approach you." Jake felt excited about contributing to a real military operation. "Colonel, you said you were supposed to make contact tomorrow night. What if instead of that meeting, you let word spread around town that you're the guy who caused all this commotion today? The story would be that I'm a defense contractor carrying sensitive information, and the traffic stop triggered security protocols," Colonel Mitchell said, working through the plan. "The military response was to secure the information, not to arrest me." "Exactly. In a small town like Cedar Ridge, that story will spread faster than wildfire. By tomorrow, everyone will know about Michael Thompson and his mysterious military connections." Captain Rodriguez was speaking quietly into his radio, presumably running the new plan by his superiors. After a few minutes, he nodded. "Headquarters is willing to try it, but with modifications. We need to make this look more realistic." "What kind of modifications?" Colonel Mitchell asked. "First, we need to make it look like you're actually in trouble with the military, not protected by them. Second, we need Officer Martinez to be part of the story." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "Part of the story how?" "You're going to arrest Colonel Mitchell." The words hung in the desert air like a challenge. Jake looked at the 50 soldiers surrounding them, then at the colonel who outranked everyone present. "Captain, I can't arrest a U.S. colonel. Even if it's fake, I don't have authority." "You have authority to arrest Michael Thompson for carrying contraband," Captain Rodriguez explained. "As far as anyone in Cedar Ridge knows, you found something suspicious during the traffic stop and called for backup. The military responded because Thompson was carrying classified materials without proper authorization." Colonel Mitchell was nodding. "It's perfect. The smugglers will see me as someone who has access to military equipment but operates outside official channels, exactly the kind of person they would want to recruit." "But what happens after I arrest him?" Jake asked. "You'll hold me for a few hours, then I'll be released on some technicality. Maybe the military decides to handle it internally, or maybe the charges get dropped for lack of evidence. Either way, I'll be back on the street by evening, but now with a reputation." Captain Rodriguez checked his watch. We need to move fast. Our intelligence teams report that the smugglers are making phone calls, trying to figure out what happened this morning. The longer we wait, the more suspicious they'll become. Jake took a deep breath. He had started the morning expecting to write a simple speeding ticket. Now he was about to arrest a U.S. colonel as part of an international counterterrorism operation. "What exactly am I supposed to find on the motorcycle?" Jake asked. Colonel Mitchell walked over to his bike and opened a small compartment behind the seat. He pulled out a metal case about the size of a briefcase. "Encrypted communication device. Highly classified, definitely not something a civilian should be carrying around Cedar Ridge." "Is it real?" "Real enough. It's actually a decoy device we use for training, but it looks authentic. More importantly, it will test positive for military-grade electronics if anyone scans it." Jake looked at the case, then at the 50 soldiers watching them. "Captain, are you sure this is going to work?" "Officer Martinez, 6 months ago, we identified a weapons smuggling network that has sold equipment to terrorist organizations in 3 different countries. Colonel Mitchell has been building relationships and gathering intelligence that could shut down the entire operation. Your traffic stop today could either destroy that work or accelerate it dramatically." "No pressure," Jake muttered. Colonel Mitchell put his hand on Jake's shoulder. "Officer Martinez, you've already done more to help this mission than you know. Whether we continue or extract, you've served your country today." Jake looked around at the convoy, the soldiers, and the empty highway stretching toward Cedar Ridge. Somewhere in his quiet little town, weapons dealers were planning their next shipment to terrorists. A U.S. colonel had spent 6 months of his life trying to stop them. The least Jake could do was see it through. "All right," Jake said. "Let's arrest Michael Thompson." The plan moved into action with military precision. Captain Rodriguez positioned his soldiers to make the arrest look genuine while ensuring they could respond to any real threats. Jake felt his hands trembling slightly as he approached Colonel Mitchell with handcuffs. "Michael Thompson, you're under arrest for possession of classified materials without proper authorization," Jake announced loudly, knowing that passing motorists might overhear. "You have the right to remain silent." Colonel Mitchell played his part perfectly, looking surprised and slightly annoyed. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I have clearance for this equipment." "Sir, step away from the motorcycle and place your hands behind your back." Jake handcuffed the colonel, feeling surreal about the entire situation. A real U.S. colonel was now in custody for a fake crime to maintain a fake identity to catch real criminals. The metal case from the motorcycle sat on the hood of Jake's patrol car, looking official and mysterious. Captain Rodriguez approached with a stern expression that seemed genuine. "Officer Martinez, we'll need to confiscate that device and question the suspect. This is now a matter of national security." "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "I'll transport the suspect to Cedar Ridge Police Station for processing." "Negative. We'll handle the questioning here. You can release him into our custody." Jake looked confused, which wasn't entirely an act. "Captain, with respect, this arrest happened in my jurisdiction. I need to follow proper procedures." The exchange continued for several minutes, with Jake and Captain Rodriguez appearing to argue over jurisdiction, while Colonel Mitchell stood quietly in handcuffs. To anyone watching, it would look like a civilian police officer had stumbled into a military operation and was insisting on following local laws despite pressure from federal authorities. Finally, Captain Rodriguez seemed to reach a compromise. "Officer Martinez, you can transport the suspect to your station, but we'll have agents there within 2 hours to take custody. This doesn't leave Cedar Ridge." "Understood, Captain." Jake loaded Colonel Mitchell into the back of his patrol car. As they drove away from the convoy, the colonel spoke quietly from behind the security barrier. "Officer Martinez, that was excellent work back there. You have good instincts for this kind of operation." "Colonel, I'm still not sure I understand what we're really doing. How does getting arrested help you catch weapon smugglers? Think about it from their perspective. Someone new arrives in town 6 months ago, keeps to himself, has money but no visible job. Now he gets pulled over and suddenly 50 soldiers show up. What does that tell you about Michael Thompson? Jake considered this as they drove toward town. It tells me he's connected to the military in some way, probably not officially, and he's carrying something important enough to trigger a massive response. Exactly. And if you're running a weapons smuggling operation, what kind of person would you want to recruit? Someone with military connections who operates outside normal channels, Jake realized. Someone who might have access to equipment but doesn't follow all the rules. The arrest makes it even better. Now Michael Thompson isn't just connected to the military, he's someone the military has problems with, someone who might be willing to sell equipment to people who pay well. They reached Cedar Ridge Police Station, a small building that served the town's modest law enforcement needs. Jake had radioed ahead to Sergeant Williams, explaining that he was bringing in a suspect related to a federal investigation. He didn't provide details, but Williams understood that this was bigger than their usual drunk and disorderly cases. Jake escorted Colonel Mitchell into the station, where Sergeant Williams was waiting with paperwork and curiosity. "Martinez, what exactly did you stumble into out there?" Williams asked. "Honestly, Sarge, I'm not entirely sure. This guy was carrying some kind of classified communications equipment. The feds are sending agents to pick him up." Sergeant Williams looked at Colonel Mitchell, who maintained his calm demeanor despite being handcuffed. "Mr. Thompson, you want to explain what you were doing with military equipment?" "I'm a defense contractor," Colonel Mitchell replied smoothly. "I was transporting the device for testing. All proper authorizations were supposed to be filed." "Supposed to be?" "There was apparently a paperwork delay. Wrong time to get pulled over for speeding." Jake processed Colonel Mitchell according to standard procedures, taking fingerprints and photographs that would disappear from official records within hours. The entire exercise was designed to create a paper trail that would convince local observers while remaining invisible to federal databases. At 1:15 p.m., 2 men in dark suits arrived at the station. They identified themselves as federal agents and requested custody of the suspect and the confiscated device. Jake handed over the paperwork, maintaining the fiction that this was a routine transfer to federal authorities. But instead of leaving town, the agents took Colonel Mitchell to a safe house on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge. Within an hour, he was back on the streets as Michael Thompson, now with a story that explained his military connections and his availability for unofficial work. The plan worked faster than anyone expected. By evening, news of the morning's events had spread throughout Cedar Ridge. The story grew with each telling: a mysterious stranger with military secrets, a traffic stop that brought 50 soldiers to town, federal agents arriving to handle the situation. Michael Thompson had become the most interesting person in Cedar Ridge. At 8:30 p.m., Colonel Mitchell was having dinner at Rosie's Diner when a man approached his table. The stranger was well-dressed, probably in his 50s, with the kind of confidence that comes from money and power. "Mr. Thompson, I'm David Sterling. I own Sterling Electronics here in town. I heard you had some excitement today." Colonel Mitchell looked up from his meal, projecting mild annoyance. "Word travels fast in small towns." "Indeed it does. Mind if I sit down? I think we might have some mutual interests." This was it. David Sterling owned the largest electronics store in Cedar Ridge and had been Colonel Mitchell's primary suspect for months. Sterling had the technical knowledge to identify valuable military equipment, the business connections to move it internationally, and the financial resources to fund a sophisticated operation. "What kind of mutual interests?" Colonel Mitchell asked. Sterling sat down and spoke quietly. "The kind that might benefit from your recent experience with government bureaucracy. I understand there were some paperwork issues with your transportation activities." "You could say that. In my business, I occasionally encounter similar paperwork challenges. Sometimes, valuable items need to move through unofficial channels to reach customers who appreciate their true worth. Colonel Mitchell pretended to consider this carefully. What kind of items? Specialized electronics, communications equipment, security devices, technical systems that government agencies sometimes surplus. There's a strong international market for such items, especially among customers who value discretion. And these customers pay well? Very well. Much better than official government contracts, and with far fewer regulatory complications. Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly. I might be interested in learning more about your business, Mr. Sterling. Excellent. Why don't you come by my store tomorrow evening, say around 9 p.m. After normal business hours, we can discuss opportunities in more detail. After Sterling left, Colonel Mitchell contacted Captain Rodriguez using a secure communication device. The weapons smuggling operation was moving exactly as they had hoped. Sterling had taken the bait and was ready to reveal his network. The next evening, Colonel Mitchell arrived at Sterling Electronics at exactly 9 p.m. The store was closed to regular customers, but Sterling was waiting inside with two other men. One was Tommy Chen, who owned a shipping company that handled freight to Asia. The other was Marcus Webb, a former military supply sergeant who now worked as a logistics consultant. Gentlemen, Sterling said, meet Michael Thompson. He's interested in joining our little import-export business. For the next hour, the three men outlined their operation. They purchased surplus military equipment through carefully cultivated contacts at various bases. Much of it was legitimately surplus, but some was stolen or diverted before reaching official disposal channels. They repackaged the equipment and shipped it to customers in Eastern Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Our customers include private security companies, foreign military units, and organizations that prefer not to deal directly with U.S. government sales, Sterling explained. What kind of organizations? Colonel Mitchell asked. The kind that pay cash and don't ask for warranty cards, Webb answered with a laugh. Tommy Chen pulled out a tablet computer and showed Colonel Mitchell photographs of their recent shipments. Night vision goggles, encrypted radios, body armor, and weapons sights. All equipment that could give terrorist organizations significant advantages in combat situations. We move about $2 million worth of equipment per year, Chen said proudly, and we're looking to expand. What would you need from me? Colonel Mitchell asked. Your military contacts, Sterling replied. Someone with your clearance level could help us identify high-value items before they reach the surplus system. Early access means higher profits. Colonel Mitchell pretended to think about the offer. What's the split? For someone with your access, 20% of gross sales. Last year, that would have been about $400,000. And the legal risks? Minimal, Webb said. We handle all the shipping arrangements. Your involvement would be limited to information gathering and occasional item identification, nothing that would directly link back to you. Colonel Mitchell was recording everything through a device hidden in his jacket. The three men had just confessed to running an international weapons smuggling operation, identified their foreign contacts, and offered to pay him to steal military equipment. Gentlemen, you have a deal, Colonel Mitchell said, shaking hands with each man. They spent another 30 minutes discussing operational details. Sterling would provide Colonel Mitchell with a list of desired equipment. Chen would handle shipping logistics. Webb would manage the foreign customer relationships. They planned to start with a test shipment within 2 weeks. As Colonel Mitchell left Sterling Electronics, he activated his emergency beacon. Within minutes, Captain Rodriguez received the signal that the investigation was complete. At 11:47 p.m., 50 federal agents simultaneously raided Sterling Electronics, Chen Shipping, and Webb's home office. They arrested 14 people and seized computers, financial records, and 3 warehouses full of military equipment waiting for shipment overseas. The investigation revealed that Sterling's network had been operating for 4 years and had sold over $8 million worth of military equipment to terrorist organizations foreign intelligence services, and criminal groups worldwide. Their customers included groups responsible for attacks against U.S. forces in Afghanistan and weapons dealers supplying conflicts in Africa. David Sterling, Tommy Chen, and Marcus Webb were each sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Colonel Mitchell's undercover work led to additional arrests in 6 countries and shut down weapons smuggling networks across 3 continents. Jake Martinez received a commendation from the FBI and a personal thanks from the Secretary of Defense. He also received a job offer from the Department of Homeland Security, which he politely declined. Cedar Ridge was his home, and someone needed to keep writing speeding tickets on Highway 87. 6 months later, Jake was patrolling the same stretch of road when he noticed a familiar black motorcycle in his rearview mirror. The bike was traveling exactly at the speed limit. As it passed his patrol car, the rider gave a small wave. Jake smiled and waved back. Colonel James Mitchell had returned to Cedar Ridge, this time as himself, to testify in additional court cases. But he still rode his motorcycle to stay in practice for the next mission. Jake never found out where that next mission would take Colonel Mitchell, but he was confident that somewhere a terrorist organization would discover that their new weapons supplier wasn't quite what he seemed to be. The small town of Cedar Ridge returned to its quiet routine, with one addition to local folklore. Every year at the Corn Festival, someone would tell the story of the traffic stop that brought 50 soldiers to town and led to the arrest of international weapons dealers. The story grew more dramatic with each telling, but Jake never corrected the details. After all, the truth was classified.